Place, finding my place, my people, my future.
Hey y'all, welcome to the My Place podcast. I'm your host, Mary McSwain, and we have a very exciting conversation for you today. I am going to be joined by my dad, Jay McSwain, and we also have two very special guests that we have brought on to this episode to have a conversation about some of their experience and expertise with our Place tool at each one of their churches. In our conversation, we're going to talk about what it looks like to implement Place at your church. We're going to talk about some of the ways to determine what your purpose for Place is at your church, some of the ways to communicate that purpose, and additionally, what I think might be the most insightful part is to hear from the heart of two pastors how they have desired to serve the Lord and to serve and lead their people through helping other people find their place in life and ministry. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. Well, Pastor Jeff, Pastor Bucky, Dad, thank y'all so much for being here with us today. I'm very excited for our conversation that we're going to have. Before we jump in, I just wanted to let y'all know, first of all, again, how grateful I am that you would come have this conversation for us. I've learned so much from both of y'all being a part of each of your congregations over the years, and I've gotten to see how you've led people so well and your heart for the Lord and serving his people. So I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership and your hearts that I have learned so much from. I think that's why Dad and I have anticipated this conversation so much, because we know your hearts for the Lord and your hearts for his people. So I'm excited to get started with our conversation and get an insight into your heart, again, for his people, for his church. But before I start asking y'all some questions, I do have a question for you, Dad.
Okay.
So when you train churches in our implementation process, how to implement Place at each one of their churches, you walk them through 4 steps. So if you would, walk us through those 4 steps.
Yeah, and I want to just say this up front too. I serve under Pastor Jeff, and you serve under Pastor Bucky, and these are two of my favorite people in the world that I respect in incredible ways, and I'm really honored just to serve under you and to have the opportunity that I've been able to be in your church too, Bucky. Yeah. So thank y'all also for being here tonight. Very grateful. So what are the 4 steps? 4 steps if you want to implement Places. 1, you have to determine what your purpose is. And we're going to hear a little bit from the 2 pastors and their purpose. And then the second step is, how do you communicate it? I say this all the time. That's one of the hardest things, is communicating the purpose over and over and over in a church setting. So that's number 2. Number 3 is you got to execute it. You can use a tool like Place, but if you don't execute it, you don't get to the finish line. And then the 4th step is you have to evaluate what your purpose is, how you communicated it, and how you executed it. So determine your purpose, communicate it, execute it, and evaluate it.
Pastor Jeff, Pastor Bucky, we brought y'all in tonight to talk about those first 2 steps, how to determine your purpose and then how to communicate that. So Pastor Jeff, my question for you, what would you say your purpose for Place is at First Redeemer?
Place at First Redeemer is one of the primary ways, the primary way we help people get engaged and involved in the life of the church. You know, when you read the New Testament, the local church is often referred to as a body made up of many different parts that have different functions. And we emphasize that everybody God brings into our church family is there for a reason. They may be a foot, they may be a hand, they may be an eye, but they have been created in a certain way to contribute to the overall function of the body. We believe the body fully functions when all of its parts are fully engaged and fully involved.
I love what you said about them being fully engaged and fully involved. And Dad, I think you're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But Pastor Bucky, I want to ask you, Place is still relatively new at North Hall Church. What have you determined your purpose for Places at your church?
Well, we really use it as a tool, one, for identification, because we're still a relatively young church. We're 4 years old, and we've been blessed to grow pretty fast. And one of the things that we struggle with is identifying who all these people that are coming to our body. and just knowing who they are. So identification was that, and then assimilation. What are we going to do with what we know? And how are we going to help them know what to do with it? Because the idea is, our emphasis, we want to put people to work in service outside the walls of our church. And because there's only so much you can do on a Sunday and a Wednesday. And so we want to find out who's in our body and then figure out what their gifts are to help them find where they're going to serve at, whether it's on the campus. Of course, that's one of the things we want to do, but also off our campus, because we don't have the facility to do much more on our campus than what we are. And so we really work hard at developing partnerships around our community and do as much off campus as we can. So, but we didn't know, I was struggling. I remember talking to your dad about doing place here, because he's done place for me at another church where it was more of established and you knew the community and you knew everything else, and it was just trying to help people understand what their giftedness was in that body, which is what place does and does well. But our other issue is, as a pastor, and I think, Jeff, you'd say this, I want to know who's in my church. And place is one of those things that kind of helps you get there, that builds that database, and then it kind of lets you see who God's bringing into your church to what type of ministries you're going to have. So instead of us trying to create a ministry and find people, where we are, we get to look at the people and say, it looks like we've got a ministry. And so both those things, identification and assimilation, and it helps us accomplish that and really speeds up the task as to how we know who's in our body and how God's gifted them. Like Jeff said, they're all got a job there. All God's children got a gift. So we want to find out what it is and get it to work.
I think the value of having both of y'all here in this conversation is you have very unique perspectives on how you have seen place been used before and how you are determining your purpose for it at each one of your churches. Dad, what are the things as they're talking that you're listening for?
Yeah, and I want to point out, you said it's relatively new at North Hall, so we kind of launched about 6 months ago. Yeah. And we are not new at our church. We launched in 1999, and you and I weren't on staff at the church. You weren't the senior pastor, but we've been doing it a long time there. And what were the words I was listening for? I remember when I first went on staff, going on 10 years ago. I remember sitting in a meeting, and Jeff, our pastor, said those words, engaged and involved. And you heard him so articulately, engaged and involved in the body. So the key words to me was our purpose is to get engaged and involved. And he talked a lot about the body at our church. But I was even telling him today, and I met with a member of our church that I actually did the baptism 2 weeks ago. And he was telling me, and this is a very successful man, he was telling me today about someone they brought into their home that has had a lot of struggles in life. And he said, I feel like, and this is a man that is very wealthy, he said, I feel like in my life, this is the first time in my life I've done something that is meaningful to help another person. So while we're helping people get engaged and involved, the process is also helping people outside the walls of our church. And I think that's the beauty of, we get a lot of people engaged and involved through our church. When I was listening to Bucky talk, he used the word identification, and he also used the word assimilation, and then he started talking about outside the walls of the church. But yet I thought about yesterday. I was driving to our church to teach place. I get a call from you, and you were asking me about someone that I coached at North Hall in the fall. Would they be a good person to help be an integral part of a new ministry with discipleship that y'all were starting at the church? So both the guys described it. One, engaged and involved in the church, outside the church, but it's working both ways, both in the church and out of the church, because I think that's what place does. It's a natural way to get people connected, but also to help them see what God wants them to do outside the walls.
One of the key ways that Place is brought to life and is often communicated that you always say, one of the keys to that is to have the support of your senior pastor. So, Pastor Jeff, between you and Dad, how do y'all communicate the value of Place and upcoming opportunities to your church since it has been established at First Redeemer for so long?
Right. Well, when we have an upcoming Place session, we do many things to try to make the entire church aware that we have a Place session coming up. All of our announcement videos, announcements from the pulpit, emails that go out to the entire church family. But we also target those people who are new to the church, who may not be familiar with Place, what it is and why we do it. So we target those people. We also have an event a couple, 3 times a year called Lunch with the Pastor, where we invite people who are new to visiting our church, guests to our church. We invite them to lunch. We tell them about the church. We always end that event by sharing with them when the next Place event is. These people, for the most part, have never heard of Place, and it's their first introduction to it. But I'll tell you something else that I found as I've talked about Place and why people should be involved. Place is a wonderful what. People are more inspired by the why than they are the what. And a lot of times when I'm writing a sermon, I find myself in Scripture, for example, when I'm preaching about how the church is a body made up of many different parts that all come together for the overall function of the body. That's the why of Place. So a lot of times in a sermon, I'll use Place not as the what. I will use Place as an application of the why. Here's what the Bible teaches about the body, or here's how the Bible describes God created you uniquely to do the works of service. And I'll point to Place as the application. And I always ask Jay to be in the grand foyer after that sermon because I want people to seize that moment and sign up for an upcoming session.
Dad, can you speak to, you're on staff with Pastor Jeff, can you speak to the value that you've experienced having his support, the support of your senior pastor?
One, it makes me feel really good that I have the support of him. But I look at it this way, and I say this all the time. The person that is the most visible within the church is the senior pastor. And when people, when I've been in churches before and heard of churches like, wow, that would have been a great place for the pastor to plug Place, no pun intended. And knowing that he will plug it and get up and endorse it. And what I love is, we actually have this on video too, is he tells our church when we use a lot of different ways to communicate it, he goes, and I've been through Place. And even if you remember, you went through a coaching session with me, which that was kind of interesting. But having the support of the pastor, there's no amount of how you say how important that is, because that says to the church that this is a high value within our church, not Place. And I love, we don't promote Place. We promote how Place helps, as you said it so well, with that why. So, yeah.
Pastor Bucky, before you communicated your purpose to your church, you started with your staff. Yeah. What was the value of helping your staff understand your mission and vision, your purpose for having Place come to your church?
Yeah, well, one thing was to just kind of educate them as to what Place is and how it works. And, you learn some of your greatest lessons are through failure. And before, when I'd implemented Place at a previous church, I didn't do a good job of introducing it through the staff, and so that they could catch a vision for it and they would see how it works and how it helps them. And so one of the things is I wanted them to understand what Place was, and I love what you said, Jeff, get the why of it, not just see it as a program or a tool, but understand the mission of what we're trying to accomplish here, to help you understand how God has uniquely gifted you in your experiences and your giftedness and your personalities, and then how that's going to work with the people that you work with, serve with, and communicate to. And so it meant a lot to me to get our staff to understand the value of place. And the only way you're going to do that is if you go through it and understand it. And so you and your dad did the coaching sessions with our team, and they helped them. Plus, the added thing of this, and I tell pastors this all the time, if you don't do it for your church and you have multiple staff, you ought to do it for your staff, to let them see how they communicate and how they learn and how they do things. We all do different stuff differently. I mean, we may go to the same direction, but we'll go at a different pace or a different way or something like that. And a lot of that is just by our personality. It's not a right or wrong situation. It's just the personality of the person doing it. We hear differently. We share differently. We act differently. And so it helps understand who these people are. And so we saw it as a great team building piece for our team, so that they would understand each other and understand what place is and how to use place, not only in their ministry, but in how they connect people to work and serve one another. And so that was a big thing for us. And then watching that take place, and for instance, Jameson, our student pastor, who we just had hired right before you guys started here, he still talks about how it helped him understand how to communicate with Laney, who's his assistant, and helps him in student ministry. And they were struggling a little bit, but now he understood, here's Laney, this high C. I'm your list maker, I'm your organizer, I like to know what's coming, I can help you plan it, I can help put everything in place and let you go do what you do, because Jameson is not a C. And so him understanding that she's not a threat to him, she's a great asset to him. And that light went off. And Laney probably is wondering, when does the light go off? Because he's using it and really taking advantage of all the things. And that's what place does. Place helps you understand and see the people around you and their gifts as advantages and not things to take you down. They help you work better. And so that made a big difference on our team.
In addition to the value that you saw on your team, how has it helped you as a leader of your staff, knowing who they are?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, it tells you, there's some staff that need a little bit longer ramp to get to where you are. There are some that can get it right away. There are some that are processors and have to think it through. And you have to learn. Sometimes when I'm asking my staff something, I know this person's going to give me a quick answer. This person's going to have to say, I'm going to have to take a couple of days. And you got to allow them that space to do it if you want a good answer. And so if I want them to answer me on the same day, I've got to ask one of them 2 days earlier and understand how they think and how they do and how they'll go about attacking a certain situation and issue. So it helps me understand that. Your dad and I have had this conversation before. One of the things that I struggle with sometimes is I always want people to solve and do according to my personality. And they're not like that. And so helping me understand who they are and their personality and how they're going to take a look at it, it gives me a little bit of help there, because I'll think about it differently. Like your dad says, I'm pretty much fire, ready, aim. And so that's kind of where I go. And so I have to have some people that do aim before they fire. And that helps me.
Dad,
Can I ask him to make one comment? And I'd probably say, because we did take our staff through, right when I came on staff, we took the time to take all of our staff through. But I remember, especially when we got to the coaching part, I'm not sure that all of the staff was like super, like, this is going to be the greatest experience in the what was their anticipation of us meeting together?
Well, they looked at it more of an evaluation, that we're being evaluated on our job. Am I going to have a job after this thing gets down here? What is this going to be? What are the results? They looked at it kind of like it was a test that I'd brought you guys in to evaluate them and their work and recommend to me who can stay and who can go. But I think as soon as they got into the coaching aspect of it and saw what it was, it really turned the corner for them.
Yeah.
Dad, we've talked a little bit about the value of having the support of your senior pastor, but in addition to the support of your senior pastor, what is the value of the buy-in of your staff, of your lay leaders, of the people who are in leadership of your ministries, of understanding a tool like this and the value of their buy-in as you communicate your purpose to the rest of your church?
I've found the buy-in is that they're the ones that are actually going to help the people on board into ministries. And if they don't have the buy-in, then people are going to be disappointed. And I think one of the great, when you said, I didn't even bring this up, when you said the support of what's the value of having the support of the senior pastor? When we first started, I remember you having to help me because we weren't always getting people following up. And now we were using our database, having to report every weekend how people were. We don't have to now. And I think that is one of the greatest things that I could say that of why I like place at our church is our staff follow people up. And I tell this to people every time. If you don't get followed up quickly, it is not because our staff member dropped the ball. It's because I dropped the ball. And I wish I could say I haven't dropped the ball ever. But the buy-in is these people are excited to get involved. They're excited for what God may have them. And if the staff are not following up, if the staff are not helping, I don't commit to anyone that they're going to serve in a ministry. They don't commit to me as a coach. It's between that staff member or that ministry leader, because it's not always a staff member, it could be a ministry leader. They're the ones that make that commitment to each other, and then that staff ministry leader helps onboard that person.
We've already mentioned that Place is relatively new at North Hall Church. It's been around for a good many years at First Redeemer. And this is a question for both of y'all, but Pastor Jeff, I'll ask you first. What is the value or the fruit that you've seen from using Place in your life and in your ministry and at your church?
You know, someone's experience in a church completely changes when they go from being an attender to being fully engaged and fully involved. So it enriches their church life. But as I alluded to earlier, it also enriches the function of the church. If God brings someone to our church and they sit on the sidelines, there's something that God is calling our church to do that's not being fully done. So getting people out of the bleachers onto the playing field has been a very positive thing for us. Our goal is for everybody that comes to our church to have some engagement, some involvement somewhere. And that is something that benefits both them and the church.
Pastor Bucky, now I'll ask you, it is relatively new at North Hall Church, but I know that you've used it before. So what is the value that you've seen in your many years being around the tool at churches you've been at, where you are now, the value you've seen for your ministry and for your churches?
I think what we're seeing even now at North Hall is the anticipation of serving. You know, I've gone through, I've been coached up, I've been given some direction as to where I'm serving. Now I can serve. So I think there's that anticipation of I feel better about what God's called me to do and has gifted me to do. And so they're eager. They feel like I'm serving where I'm gifted, instead of just throwing Jell-O against the wall and trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be. And so they feel a little bit more confident about what they're doing. And of course, we still have to equip people. Even in their giftedness, they need equipping. But we're seeing that anticipation. Just even recently, again, you did a thing with our student leaders. And they all feel so much more confident about the roles they're taking in that student ministry. And the same thing as you're now doing that in our college ministry. Many of them probably hadn't even heard of what their spiritual giftedness was, or either they took a test and had no clue as to what that meant for them and how it manifested itself in their life. So I think it's just the anticipation and the confidence of saying, hey, listen, this is what this means. This is how God's wired me. And so it helps them understand, so God has this expectation of me because I'm gifted in this way. So it really does help them in their confidence in serving.
We've heard from both of y'all how you've determined your purpose, the unique ways that it's communicated from each of y'all. Dad, I want to ask you, what is the value and the need for knowing your purpose, communicating that, and what are some of the consequences of either not knowing your purpose or not communicating it?
Well, I think the value is, we quote Ephesians 2:10 all the time, for we're God's workmanship. Created. The value is, how you're actually created. The value is, we talk about our identity in Christ a lot. I mean, you hear that word a lot. So what does that really mean? Well, part of what it means is your identity is God has given you gifts. God has given you life experiences. Well, how do those gifts connect back to those life experiences? He's given you passion. So the value is knowing how God created you. Why? So that you can do what God created you for. That verse says, for your God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus. Here it is, for good works, which God prepared in advance. I love this version, that you should walk in them. God can use people who don't know their gifts. He does it oftentimes. But when you know them and you begin to leverage them, I think that's one of the great benefits of using a tool like Place, again, to know the why of what God's created you to do.
Well, I would just like to say it has been incredibly insightful for me to hear each one of your unique perspectives. Each of y'all have had your own experience in leading people, leading God's people, and serving Him well. And hearing each one of you articulate, even through the lens of your personality, which is what we talk about a lot here, I've heard y'all articulate it through the lens of your personality and how that influences your leadership. So thank y'all for being here with us tonight, for sharing your insights, your experience, and your expertise. And thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time on the My Place podcast.